to my giant book right there. Does it start playing? Oh, it is. Okay. I was so happy to find out this is a thing. I am super reflective right now. Today I turned 65. I get Medicare. And I just got married. I just got married 2 weeks ago, which at this, I did not think this is where my life would be right now. I had a husband that I love dearly, that it's his 16-year anniversary of his death was, this month is everything reflective. I'm also finishing up a memoir. So I am deep in reflection, and a lot of it goes back to these times because I have a podcast. I have this giant book. It's on Amazon. I guess those pictures are in there. But when people say showgirl, I feel like I wanted to dismiss that part of my life because my dance studio at Westlake Dance Center is right across from a strip club called Showgirls. And when I teach a showgirl class, which I have one coming up tomorrow, we have to start out with what a showgirl is not, because people think strippers, they think they're dumb. If you watch movies, they're usually the eye candy with the mafia, which is true because I've done a lot of interviews around the mafia in Vegas with some of these dancers. Usually, yeah, they're prostitutes. I never sold my body, okay? I did not do that. But it's made me very reflective because when I left that part of my life, I did not look back. When I started my studio, I didn't want people to think that's what I did until, oh my gosh, it was 2018 on Facebook. Somebody posted a picture of me in one of these gorgeous, I'm in here somewhere, one of these costumes and said, does anyone know where Sheri Pennington is? Which is my maiden name. And I went, uh-oh, it's out there. People know I did this. And then I found out there was a reunion for Hello Hollywood. Hello, which was a show I was in. It is still the biggest show in the world. That it's closed long ago, but the stage, and this is not an exaggeration, was the size of a football field. When you took the wings out, it was a full acre. And there were 150 in the cast, international, like in my dressing room, there were people from England, Australia, there's some Americans. I learned a lot backstage and learned a lot more of who Bluebell is because I auditioned for her when I was 19 because I'm tall. I grew up in Puyallup, Washington, a little studio, and you think you're advanced when you're 16 because the big girls graduate and now you're the big girls and like, oh, we're advanced. I moved to Vegas because my dance teacher said, you're tall, you got long legs, you got ballet training, that's what they're looking for. So my roommate and I drove down and showed up for our first class, which is now its legendary studio that all the best dancers in Vegas went there. And these are all working dancers from around the world. We walked in and they said, how long have you been dancing? And I said, 12 years, we're advanced. We didn't say it quite like that. And so we took class and we were humbled beyond any way I've been humbled in my life. People were like, I'd never seen this caliber of dancer. People are kicking their face, pirouettes, energy. You left like wringing your clothes out. You danced so hard. And I'm like, oh, I saw you in a show with Juliette Prowse, or you with Debbie Reynolds, or you were in this big show. So we came back the next day, more sore than I remember ever being, and we signed in and they said, how long have you been dancing? Because they didn't recognize us. I go, we just started yesterday. So I learned more in that year. And when I moved to Vegas, I had no idea how you did this. I know I wanted to be a dancer. When you have your guidance counselor at high school and they say, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I say, I want to be a dancer. And they're like, no, you have to pick a real job. I think to them it sounded like I wanted to be a professional eater. Like, you make money dancing. So no one knew how to help me, but I watched the Sonny and Cher show, and they had dancers. I'm like, see, that's real. And they wore Bob Mackie. Does anyone know who Bob Mackie is? Yeah. Choreographer Cher, I watched the Carol Burnett. I saw the show Vegas, and I watched Love Boat had dancers. I'm like, it's a thing, and they get to wear feathers. Which is fun. In my podcast, I interviewed Bob Mackie last year, and that was like my dream interview. And I said it's because of those costumes. I used to deliver flowers at the MGM when I moved to Vegas, and I would take flowers to celebrities and backstage, and I would stay way too long backstage because I'm like looking at the costumes. Bob Mackie designed a lot of those, and it's Swarovski crystals. In the show I was in, one of my dresses was $10,000, solid crystals. And so when you see, oh, that's my podcast. Maybe let's get a loop again. But I think, I just didn't want people to know, because when I would go back home for reunions, people say, oh, I heard you're dancing naked on party boats. I'm like, I danced on a cruise ship, wearing clothes, and I had an amazing, fun career with adventure, but I dismissed it until a few years ago. After I got the show in Hello Hollywood, okay, I can tell you this audition story. 300 people. I showed up in black leotard, black tights, my hair was down, minimal makeup, and my heels were this big. I thought I was wearing heels. That's basically slippers. And I walked in, 300 dancers, a lot of them who were working dancers. Full makeup, eyelashes that go over your eyebrows, hair up, lipstick, rhinestone bra, the thong, leotard, fishnets, heels. And I went, oh, I am so out of place here. And while we're waiting to go on, you go on in groups of 10. I couldn't see the stage, I couldn't see the choreography. All I heard was this producer, who now I know is Don Arden, who was the person you wanted to get hired by, but also one of the most cruel people as a producer. I heard him screaming at people, you're fat, you're ugly, get off my stage, get your fat thighs off my stage. Things like, your face looks like a can of worms. He gets credit for creativity. But I went, I can't do this, and people were coming off crying. So I got on the stage, we did the choreography, and I picked it up, and then he told somebody they were fat or ugly, and then he looked at me and he goes, I won't say how loud he did it, and this microphone will hurt your ears, but he said, you, step forward. And he said, get your hair off your face. And I pulled my hair up, and he said, you stay, the rest of you go take dance lessons. So that was nice, but it was also terrifying. And so out of that 300, there were 7 of us, and then we had to go see Miss Bluebell, hence the name Bluebells. Her name is Bluebell because when she was a kid, the doctor said her eyes were the color of bluebells, and that just kind of stuck. So she was Madame Bluebell. And so I had to audition. She had to see how tall we were and make sure we were okay. So I didn't really know her legacy until years later. I cried in her hotel room when I went to sign my contract. I was going to turn it down because my parents were not thrilled that I was going to be exposing a lot of skin. And she said, if you turn this down, you're missing a great opportunity. I said, I'm a born-again Christian, I'm a virgin, I'm super naive. And she said, really good ladies do this. It's a great career. And so when I've done my interviews, I've talked to, some of these people. That's Dita Von Teese, I interviewed her. Women in their 80s now would talk about being a Bluebell in the 60s, that you had your own money. She took them around tours of Italy. They danced in Paris. And they were taken care of. She put them in taxis so they were safe. And in Vegas at the time when she brought her show from Paris to the Stardust in Las Vegas, the showgirls then were expected after the show to go out and fraternize with the clients. They would be at the craps table like as good luck, or more things are expected. And so when they said Miss Bluebell's dancers had to do that, she said, my dancers will not do that. And if you want them to do that, I'm taking them all back to Paris. So that stopped being a thing. And the other dancers said, if the Bluebells don't have to do it, we're not going to do it. So it started to change. Like, you are dancers, you're smart people and are talented. That's why you're hired. You're not hired to be on the arm of a mafia person to make them look special. So I ended up from that show, which was great because then you learn about all the other shows. So backstage, people were talking about working in Paris, working in Australia. And then 2 girls came back and said they're looking for dancers for Puerto Rico. I'm like, I want to travel. And when you're a Bluebell, you didn't have to audition because people knew if you could get past Don Arden, you're fine. They could hire you. So then I ended up working in Puerto Rico. And then from there I worked to Montreal, and I got to experience the world. I grew up in Puyallup. I'd never been anywhere. And they're paying you, flying you to dance and do what you love and put you up in a hotel. And in Montreal, this is one of my reflection stories, is I loved the French influence of Montreal, loved the show. And I was featured for the first time in a show. I mean, it wasn't 150. This was a cast of 8. It's a little bit easier to be featured. And I had the fastest change in the show. I would come off and I'd have to take off a headpiece. I had sleeves. I had all this stuff that had to come off. And you have like rhinestone G-strings. Don't wear those under your jeans. They show. But they're like a decorative. Like, you'll see them in a lot of these costumes. They have a hook and you have to take that off, put your next thing on. So in the dress rehearsal, I could not make this change. I was supposed to be up the stairs in 1 minute with a full costume on. I'm like, I had done fast changes. This was like ridiculous. So the producer yells at me like, why can't you make this change? I go, can you come back and see what's happening? And he watches, goes, oh, you can't do that. So he called the stagehand over. He goes, can you help her? She has a fast change. And met this guy, Carl. And he said, what do you need? He goes, can you unhook her G-string and help her get out of there? And he was like, yeah, okay. So I would come off. He would do it with one hand, unhook it, and then he could page the curtain and let the dancers on with the right hand. I'm like, I'm going to marry this guy. But me being a conservative Christian virgin, I was waiting for marriage. And so we tried to be a couple, and that's usually a deal breaker if someone is 20. Kind of fell in love, but stayed away. And then I wanted to go on and dance more. I was not ready to stay in one place. So I ended up going on cruise ships and dancing. I ended up working in Bermuda, one of my most favorite places I've ever worked. They put us up in this hotel. It's paradise. We're doing shows. We were like doing advanced with dignitaries. We were like in the news. I was the official bird trainer. That's in my memoir that's coming out. It's one of those stories that my friends laugh out loud of how ridiculous this job was, to train 24 white doves to fly from the light booth. They could fly an inch, and it did not go well. But after that, I thought I needed to wear more clothing and come back. My parents are getting divorced, so I stopped dancing for all the wrong reasons. People said, you should be a youth pastor. You're really good with youth. And I'm like, okay. So I stopped dancing. And I think that's one of the things I'm reflecting of why I stopped was not the right reason, because I was offered, in that year, I was offered a world cruise, Paris, I had more job offers and some of the best. And the Lido in Paris is the top. That's where a lot of these photos are from. The most prestigious cabaret in the world, which Miss Bluebell brought her dancers there. And so I turned it down. And so I was trying to be a normal person. And I got married. It was wonderful. I had kids. My husband ended up with a depression. He had a paragliding accident and broke his back, and he had one suicide attempt, and that was hell to get through. And so the reflection, he said, a lot of it's painful. Going back over this part of my story I've looked at it in a different way, and it's been healing, and it's been hard to tell the truth because I just didn't want to admit how awful it was. And then he finally took his life, and I had 2 kids at the time, teenagers, that it kind of wrecked our whole family. So in my memoir, the first part is my dance career. The second part is meeting my husband, building this life, being happy, I've got a family, and then watching it just all crumble. And the last third of my book is the healing. And I talk about plant medicine, and I talk about dance therapy, and all the different things I did to try to become a whole person. And like little by little, I feel whole, I feel love, I feel all that stuff that I was not ready for. But it's been by reflecting. And so when I saw that picture of me in Hello Hollywood Hello, and my friend reached out to me, we got together, she told me about who Miss Bluebell was. This was like 40 years after the fact. I had no idea her legacy of what she did to change the face of dance and cabaret, and how she was probably the most respected person, but nobody really knew. We just did one show after the other. It was very prolific in the 80s. I just could pick, throw a rock and go, where do I want to go? That's gone. Like people like Riley, I love my dancers at Westlake. I can't tell them where to go to be a dancer. So I went to the Hello Hollywood reunion. I just had my second hip replacement. I had crutches. My leg was double the size, and I was on morphine, and it was really fun. And I had to fly with my swollen leg. But when I saw they had all of our costumes there that we could go up and see like the quality, these are the best costumes probably any show's ever had. And a friend of mine has preserved them. So she brought them out so I could actually like put some of the things on and go, oh my gosh, that's one of the costumes I wore. That's the current Lido in Paris, which is now closed. But anyway, so once I went to the reunion, I go, I want to tell these stories. These are amazing stories. And then I went to the Bluebell reunion in Paris, and there was 300 of us. And I was trying to find the Lido on the Champs-Elysees, trying to look at my GPS. And I look up, and there's these women and men the women are like 6 feet tall, and they have heels. And some of them are 80, and they still stand up like with this beautiful poise, and everybody was dressed up. And I go, I found my people. And this was something I had dismissed in my life. And just standing in line to get our lanyards and our goodie bags, I was hearing the stories about like travel. Like one of the dancers that I've interviewed from Australia got a phone call backstage because somebody said, somebody's going to call you in between shows. She's like, okay. And the phones used to just be hanging on the wall. Do you guys even know what those are? That had the cord. So they had a phone backstage, and she gets this call, and he said, I'm going to take you to dinner tonight. She goes, who is this? This is Francis. I got a show to do. So she left the phone just hanging there. She went and did her number, changed her clothes, like, he's still on the line. Oh, I'm sorry, who is this? This is Francis. I'm going to take you to dinner tonight. She goes, I don't know you. I got another number to do. So she went on stage, just went on for 20 minutes. Well, Francis is hanging, the phone is just hanging there, Francis on the line. She goes, who is this? Frank Sinatra. And she's like, so she turned down Frank Sinatra. So these were stories I was just hearing, like waiting in line. And I go, I want to do a podcast, because I was a podcast junkie. That's where I get most of my information. And I didn't know how to do it. Well, then COVID hit, and we had Zoom and time. And so I started reaching out. I reached out. The first person was the one who put the Bluebell reunion on in Paris, and interviewed her. And it was when it hit so hard in Italy. So we were also doing real life conversations. I thought I was going to do more history, and it turned into like, how's your heart? How are you doing? Pete, we've talked about the AIDS crisis, because that was the time I was dancing. I was kind of there before it hit hard, but there's cast pictures where all the men are gone. And nobody really talked about it. We all grieved it after the fact, and so that brought us together as a community. So there are bluebells all over the whole world. And so I would post a picture of them, and their friends would find them like, oh, I haven't seen you for years. And conversations started to happen. And we did a thing, I actually posted a video of just the people we lost to AIDS, and it was so long, and it made me cry. And the pictures just kept coming and coming. So it felt like it was a cathartic thing that we got to grieve together, but we also celebrated. We told these stories, and I've had people say, well, I don't think my life is that interesting. And then they're telling me about being backstage with the Tigers. And one of my friends, the lion, we had a lion in our show, the MGM lion, just peed on all the showgirls. You know, they pee backwards and they spray like really far. His cage rotated, and all of us were like on stage, and the song is The Most Beautiful Girl in the World. And we just see, and that urine does not come out of costumes very well. So there was just stories that we just tell, like, and I went to the store, and then I turned down Frank Sinatra, and I had to step over horse poop because there was 9 white horses in our show, and I had to lift up my thing and not step in the poop as I would do my dance. So I just really started to go, this was an amazing life. And I have a friend who wrote the foreword for my memoir. She said, I'd known you for years, no idea that you did this. She'd say, oh yeah, when I was swimming with the dolphins in Bermuda. She goes, what? I didn't know that. And so I started to actually tell more of this part of my story, and I go, this is amazing. And so I started a cabaret in Seattle called A Night in Paris because I wanted to bring this kind of show back, not with $10,000 dresses, mine are smaller budget, but I wanted to bring back that glamour. And so I auditioned dancers in Seattle. We have great dancers. But to do the show, you had to be strong in ballet. I made them do a waltz, I made them do a can-can. They had to do all the styles. They had to perform. They had beautiful technique. And then they got to wear the feathers, and they would transform and be like, and we talked about unapologetically taking up space. So a showgirl is not, if you see how glamorous these pictures are, there's joy, there's boldness, there's embodiment, and you're unapologetically female. And we talk a lot about that in the interview. To be a female, what you wear, people decide who you are and how much they can say about your body. You're up there, and there's a bunch of people, and they look at you not like, oh, I can have you. They're like, oh, like we were basically like goddesses. Like we were unapproachable. Take off your makeup, put your sweats on, go home and have popcorn. And you got to experience what it was like to feel glamorous without worrying like, what have I actually like opened myself up to? So for me, it feels really empowering. And that's one thing when I teach a showgirl class, is like, this is for you. This isn't like, in a lot of dance, like you have to be sexy. Like, what does that even mean? Who am I doing this for? Like, what does it feel like to be in your body and feel beautiful? And Pete Menefee, who designed a bunch of these costumes, him and I have gotten to be great friends. He's 84 and one of my sweetest friends. He's designed, we did a game called What Has Pete Not Designed? I go, have you done cat shows? He goes, I have not designed for cats, and I have not done puppets. But he's done like the Ice Capades, he does the Rockettes, he's done everything. And so I told him, when I wore your costumes, I felt beautiful. And he said, that's not my costume. You guys all had it, you just didn't know it. So there was something of being able to bring this out. So when I teach these classes, I watch people feel like, I get to stand tall, I get to take up space. So that has become a beautiful thing to me. So I had the podcast. I've done 200 interviews, and because COVID I had time, well now people don't have time, it's a little bit harder. But I have a lot of older people that say, I don't know how to do a podcast. I don't know how to work my computer. Like my Zoom calls, I had a bunch of 80-year-olds on. It was hysterical because people were like, what button is this? And then people were like calling me on FaceTime, and we had to explain Zoom. So this book came out a year ago. This is a whole thing of reflections. It's massive. But because there's color pictures, it was a little bit expensive. And I have friends in Australia. But it's our story. And people have said what's nice is people have done the history of showgirls, and it's all very data-driven. These are their real stories. And I had a woman who's 80-something, her granddaughter messaged me. She goes, I had no idea my grandmother did that. Like she traveled Europe as a dancer when women were just like, you could be a nurse, you can be a secretary. She's like, my mom was a showgirl that traveled the world. And I go, your grandma's a badass. She goes, yeah. And so the people that like, it's their voice telling their story. So in the book, I've transcribed it. And it's condensed, but it really is like, to me, every person I met, every story feels sacred. Like I love hearing these stories, and I love to hear how it changed their lives. And I ask, like, how did this translate into the rest of your life? And people said, when you're in a show, you can't be late. There's no way you could be late for a show. You have to be on because you understand the whole picture, how every person matters. And they said like they have confidence. They can speak in front of people, even though we didn't open our mouth on stage. They said it gave them this confidence to unapologetically take up space. Aren't those costumes gorgeous? So I actually was there when the Lido closed 2 years ago, which was heartbreaking. The show had been there 75 years, the theater had been there, and it got bought out because they wanted to just make it easier, not spend so much money. So I had interviewed so many of these young, beautiful dancers who would work to get to the Lido, which was the top. Like the Moulin Rouge is great. Lido is a little bit more prestigious, but because of the musical and the movie, people know the Moulin Rouge, and they weren't really going to the Lido. I went to the show and I cried. It was just, it's so beautiful, it's so glamorous. And so I was interviewing these dancers who were on hold for COVID, doing whatever they could do in their house to stay active and make sure they're ready to go. And as we know with COVID, we thought, what, 3 weeks? Turns into a year and a half, and I'm hearing their grief of them waiting. And so when they finally got on stage, they were sending me videos of opening night. And so I got to celebrate, and I was sending it out to Bluebells all around the world. Like, can you send them a message? Like, we're proud of you, you got this. So they got back on stage, and I had a trip to Paris to celebrate that Cabaret was opening up again. And then it lasted 6 months when they sold it. So I was there the week before, and I got privileged to sit in on the rehearsal, and they're doing their last show. They brought back a bunch of numbers, and they're giving everything, and then they'd start crying, and they'd have to keep going. And they were so glamorous at the very, very end. But it was really sad, because when I did it, it was at its peak, and now the shows are gone. I mean, there's still the Moulin Rouge, which is wonderful. But it's the story part that is my favorite, of like just being in with their heartache. Like, yeah, we get it. We're here with you. We'll celebrate. We'll cry with you. Yeah. So I think I have more. Oh, I got to get back to my Montreal story. So Carl, who undid my G-string, is now my husband. I had been to Bermuda. I'd done a lot of healing around the trauma of my husband's death, but I also had like sexual trauma. I've been sexually abused. I also had a lot of religious trauma. Everything after my husband died, all just, when you're trying to hold a like beach ball under the water, everything was popping up, and I had to actually get help. So I had so much healing, and I was trying to find my journal from Bermuda, and I found my journal from Montreal. So talk about reflective. And I'm reading, I'm like, oh, I thought I was so mature. But I'm like, well, Carl, like, we're making out, but I can't do that anymore. Okay, we're gonna do it again. Okay, I went too far. And I would feel guilt, and I'd write all this down. And so I found my journal, and there was a section in there. There was a girl in our show who was a lead that would just walk by and grab his crotch. And I'm like, who would? I was horrified. Well, he told me this story, so I was joking that I would do this one day because I didn't do anything. And I hauled off, and I had way too much power. And I punched him in the crotch. He doubled over, swore, went to his room, and I went back crying. And I think he probably will never have children. I've ruined his life. And he came back to make sure I was okay. I go, I punched you in the crotch, but you're making sure I'm okay. And he just said, no wonder you're still a virgin. And so I don't really have this thing down. But I sent that picture, I did a screenshot of my journal and sent it to him after 42 years and just said, how are you? How's your crotch? But we started to reconnect, and I was going to be in New York, and I said I was going to take a train up to Montreal because I'd missed it. It was one of my favorite places I worked. And he said, I'll meet you there. I come for my birthday. So we had this whole lead up of connecting, but we already knew each other's story. And one of the first questions he asked, are you still religious? I'm like, no, that's been some healing. Nothing against that. It was the way I had done religion, was fear-based. It was all about going to hell. Like, I'm going to go to hell because I'm wearing these costumes. I'm going to go to hell because I went too far. So if I'm going, it's fun. So fun, right? But we reconnected. We were already saying I love you before we met up. We got together, and one of my friends like, you dummy, you were always supposed to be together. And so, yeah, we got married 2 weeks ago. He's in Toronto, which is making this way more complicated. But in the memoir, that's my last chapter, and it's just full circle, because at the time, it wasn't right. And then after a lot of healing in our life experience, we got back together, and it's like we were just meant to be together, and it's been beautiful. So he knows my showgirl things. He's not like, you were wearing G-strings, and I'm so embarrassed. He's like, he told me it was because of my ass that he wanted to marry me. And I went, and that's actually in our wedding vows. Riley was there as a photographer. My friend put that in the vows about this jump I did, that he would go backstage to just wait for the right time. He's got other good qualities. But anyway, that is deep in the reflection, and the memoir comes out, and I'm reading it, and I don't think I even saw my life the same way until I finished it. 'Cause I did not know what I was writing. It was a free write. And my best friend has been editing, and she says, I knew you when your husband died. I knew all that. I did not know how bad it really was. And so she will tell me, she'll start crying. And I'm like, I feel like to be seen and heard is what we want most, but it's the most terrifying. So to put this out there, I have to be careful. I'm having my daughter read it to make sure there's things that aren't too personal that bring my kids into the story. So we're kind of figuring out how to do that. But the reflection of that, I start out, the chapters, are you in awe of your life? Because I didn't know how much in awe of my own life I was until I started hearing other people's stories. I'm like, hey, how did I leave my small town and just go to Vegas? Like, how did any of us just go set out to do something that was against what everybody told us was possible? And so that is kind of the full circle of that, of starting out going, how do I do this? And like, oh, I did it. And I'm leaving my studio that I've had for 31 years. We're in a transition. I've loved every second, but it's like it needs new energy, needs new life. And I have like this whole adventure ahead at 65 years old. And I'm like, what's next? And I'm going to look for one of these up in Toronto because I'm trying to find creative community, and like starting out not knowing anybody. This is what I was looking for, and I didn't even know till today. So, did I go way over my time? I have 3 of these here, and they're on Amazon. There's a digital, which isn't quite so bulky and expensive.
All right, we have some time for Q&A. So I just ask, if you have a question, please raise your hand and let me bring the mic to you so we can get it on video. So, questions for Sheri? Okay. What did you wear to your wedding?
Rhinestone bra. No. It's one of these. Actually just had a simple white dress because we got married on my best friend's roof. And it was just our kids. Riley was our photographer and my best friend officiated. So we kept it really simple. I wanted rhinestones, but it was too much. I don't know if you saw my water bottle. It's rhinestone.
So you can tell you have a lot of passion about costumes too. Do you also do that, or how were you able to decide that you were going to focus on dancing and not go into costumes?
I appreciated people that made it. I had no desire or a skill.
Okay.
I bought my costumes from a friend of mine who had costumes in Vegas. And the ones I wore were so beautifully crafted. These are like padded bras with some rhinestones on it, and I stick feathers in a styrofoam. Their costumes are good. They're so old. Like some are 40 years old. But I don't sew, not a craft person. I was like, somebody else did. Dancing has always been the thing. I'm still dancing. I can't imagine stopping. So if I'll be teaching seniors, we'll be sitting down. I don't care. Always will be dance has been the main thing for me. And I appreciate what other people do, but like, good on you.
Are you familiar with the show Pose?
Yes.
I was just wondering, as we were going through this, I was thinking that there's just been this evolution of showgirls and dancing and runway, and it made me think of that. Have you ever interviewed anybody from that world for your podcast? And what do you think about all that?
I think they're very different, and I love and appreciate all of them. I focus mainly on bluebells because it is global, and I've done 200 and I've barely tapped into how many. So that's going to keep me busy. But I've also interviewed people from Moulin Rouge. But people that did the shows I did, like one of them was on, oh my gosh, Soul Train. He was a featured dancer on Soul Train. Some of them were Chippendale dancers. I'm like, that's a really fascinating interview to be on the bus with the Chippendale boys. So a lot of people had other things. I worked for Bluebell 1 year, but then I also worked for other producers. So I've actually kind of brought in people that were in similar shows. But because there's so much there, if they have an overlap, but what we did was production. I mean, it's like we had a kick line with like 150 kicks. It was kind of like Rockettes. So if you say you were a Bluebell in England, it's kind of like the same of being a Rockette. And some of our dancers were Rockettes. But yeah, I love all that. And I'm like, somebody else needs to start that podcast.
When you looked back and reflected on your life, did you have any regrets, or did you see things that maybe were not so favorable as learning opportunities?
The only thing I regret was stopping dancing when I did. And then I go, well, I wouldn't met my husband. Like if I hadn't met my husband, I wouldn't have a dead husband. I mean, it sounds terrible, but but also I still love that choice. He was a wonderful man until like the drugs took over and I'd have my children. So I think even that regret, there's something beautiful that came out of it. I just wish I had stopped for a different reason, because I really was had so many more opportunities. I've interviewed people that did this for 20 years, and I did it for 6 in that capacity, so I think that's it. I just wish I'd listened to my heart and not what people were saying, you should be a youth pastor. I never did that. Well, I did it for 6 months.
I'm curious about creativity that goes into choreography. I know you're teaching classes. I'm curious about how you think about the creativity that goes into choreography. Maybe, I know you mentioned some of them. There are students who are like pretty advanced in their dancing. I don't know if you also teach folks who are maybe like a little bit earlier or intermediate. I'm curious to hear more about that.
Yeah, I taught children for a short amount of time, and it's not my thing. There's people that are really great with beginning ballet. I love adults, but I taught the teens for so long, but I had so much stuff in my head that even though I was performing, I would find places to teach. Like, I have to get this out. Like, there was always a picture, a story. And we had a scholarship group at the studio where I asked them to ask choreographers their process. I thought we all did the same thing. I'm story driven, or a song will go, it's the story and the lyrics. Some people are like, it's the ding, da, ding, ding, ding in the music. And I'm like, I didn't hear that part. Like, we all go at it different. I will hear music like, I have to do something with this. And I only have 3 more classes at Westlake, and it's breaking my heart. Leaving Seattle's gonna be hard. Leaving my Monday class is the thing that's making me really sad. But it's also like this outlet, and I always try to mix it up. Like, we've done showgirl stuff in class, we'll do musical theater, we'll do lyrical, I like birds, we do weird stuff in my class. But I always want to give them variety. And also for me, because I like so many kinds of music, I'm not pegged into one. And mine's like a level 2. There are people, some of these people were professional. They just don't want to do double pirouettes. They don't want to go to the floor anymore. Like, we've done that. So it's kind of a chance for them to just dance for the love of dance. But yeah, the choreography, I started super young. My first thing I choreographed was for the talent show at 6th grade. And I had a 45. Do you guys know what 45s are? Okay. Bought it at the record bin. It was some group, and it was Jungle Fever, and it had a lot of heavy breathing and moaning in it. And I choreographed it and did it for the whole school, and I found my record a few years ago. It's actually a song about an orgasm. And I did it in front of the whole school, and all the teachers in the wings going, and no one said anything. But I mean, I was like, I'm gonna put this out there, because I was always, my mom could hear the music and there's heavy breathing and I'm in there dancing. I'm gonna do this in the talent show. But I was like, since I was young, I go, you can make up your own dance. It was just such a wonderful idea that you don't have to wait for somebody else to give you choreography. You can do your own. Thank you.
Okay, last question here. Thank you.
I heard you mention the song "The Most Beautiful Girl in the World," which I know from the Broadway musical Funny Girl. Do you feel any kinship with Fanny Brice?
I just listened to Barbara Streisand's biography on, it's the 48 hours on audio. I love that part. I love that. She's bold, and I think that's what it is. I had only seen women who were mostly docile when I was growing up, and so when I got out there and see these women that have lives and voices and travel and autonomy, I do definitely, yeah, and humor is a big part of that.
All right, let's give another hand to Sheri.